He never asked my name. Not once. Not in 3 months of nights. Not when I coughed in front of him. Not when I handed him information worth more than my entire contract. He looked at me the way men like him look at things that are useful but temporary. Tools. Weather. A cough in a cold room. I kept working anyway. Not for him, I want to be clear about that. For the work. For the archive. For the particular satisfaction of a thing made correct before the person who made it correct is no longer available to answer questions about it. I knew what was coming. I had known for months. He did not know. And by the time the silence told him what I never bothered to say aloud, there was nothing left to say it to. If you have ever kept giving, kept being careful, kept doing the work for someone who never once looked up to see you doing it, this story is yours. Stay with me. And if this is the kind of story your soul has been looking for, subscribe. You belong here. The drive into Lansing from the east always felt like entering a city that had not quite decided what it was. Downtown came at you sideways. Old limestone facades next to parking structures, next to a stretch of Washington Square, where the buildings looked normal in daylight and said nothing at all after dark. The assignment had come through a university contact, 3 lines in an email, not even a full paragraph. Private collection. Bloodline archive. Night hours only. Discretion required. The pay was exact and unreasonable. I took it. I had been given a diagnosis 11 weeks earlier. Not the kind that comes with a treatment plan attached. I had not told my sister. I had not told anyone. What I had done, the thing I did instead of telling anyone, was accept every piece of work that came through, right up until this one, which was the strangest and also the most real. A private archive. Centuries of records. Work with an actual shape to it. An end point, a purpose. The kind of work you could look at when it was finished and say, this is correct. This is complete. That mattered to me more than I had expected it to. The entrance to the library was at the back of the building, a door set into the stone that looked like it should open onto a utility corridor and instead opened onto stairs, and the stairs went down farther than the building's footprint should have allowed. The air changed 3 steps in. Not cold exactly. More like the air had been the same temperature for so long that it had stopped bothering to be anything in particular. Old paper. The specific dry weight of vellum that has not been touched in decades. Cedar. Underneath that, and something else, mineral, faint, like the smell of a room whose window has been painted shut since before you were born. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the shelves. They went back a long way. I set down my bag, took out my notebook, and began. For 3 hours, I worked without interruption. The scrolls were labeled in 4 languages, 2 of which I read fluently, and 1 of which I recognized well enough to cross-reference. The organizational system was not random. It had a logic, partial and old, like a sentence with words missing from the middle. I could see the shape of what it had been. I wrote notes on what I was finding, what needed closer attention, what could be cataloged quickly. My handwriting was even and clear. It has always been even and clear. I was mid-note when I coughed. Once. Sharp. The kind that comes without warning from a chest that has been in cold air for too long. I heard him before I saw him. Or rather, I heard the absence of sound that preceded him. The way a room goes quiet when something enters it that has never needed to announce itself. I looked up. He was standing at the far end of the shelf row. Tall. Still. White coat, silver hair, the kind of face that has been certain of its authority for so long the certainty had become structural, built into the set of his jaw, the angle at which he held himself. He was looking at me with an expression I recognized immediately and had no particular feeling about, the expression of a man assessing whether a problem is worth his attention. He walked toward me, unhurried. He stopped on the other side of my work table and looked at the notes I had made, not at me. The northern section is not to be touched until I have reviewed your methodology. His voice was low and exact. You will work from the eastern shelves first. The catalog format is specified in the folder on the left. He had still not asked my name. I noted this. Filed it. Understood. I said. He turned to go. I coughed again, quieter this time, controlled but present.
He paused.
Glanced back at me with something that was not concern. A flicker of distaste, brief and automatic, the way you look at a window rattling in a draft, not because it matters, but because the sound is there. Do manage yourself, he said. I straightened the scroll I had been holding. My hands were steady. They are always steady. Of course, I said.
He left.
I listened to the silence he left behind, and the strange thing, the thing I would not examine too closely, was that I was not insulted. Not even close. I had spent the better part of my adult life being handled with elaborate, careful concern by people who looked at me like I might break, and every one of them had eventually left, gently, with apologies, because caring for something fragile is exhausting, and no one tells you that up front. This was easier. This was, in its cold way, almost a relief. I opened a folder on the left. I read the catalog format. I went back to work. Outside, Lansing in October was doing what it always does, going dark early, going cold without apology, the oaks along Michigan Avenue dropping the last of their leaves onto graves that would be completely visible from the road until May.
I did not think about that.
I thought about the archive, about the shape of the work, about the particular satisfaction of a system made correct. I was still working when the clock at the top of the stairs read 2 a.m. I did not stop. 3 weeks in, I had stopped noticing the stairs. That is the thing about repetition, not that it makes things easier, but that it makes them invisible. The descent, the change in air, the way sound behaved differently down here, closer and more careful, like it did not want to carry too far. All of it had become ordinary, which meant the work had become the thing I noticed. Only the work. The archive had a shape now. I could see it. 7 centuries of bloodline entries, organized first by lineage, then by generation, then somewhere around the mid-1800s, by something else entirely, a logic I was still reading. The early sections were meticulous. Someone had cared about those records the way you only care about things you believe will outlast you. The handwriting changed across the centuries, but the precision did not. Entry after entry, every name accounted for, every date exact. A family that had been watching itself very carefully for a very long time. Then, the 20th century. The 20th century looked like a room someone had left in a hurry. November does something to the chest that October does not. October is cold. November is wet cold, the kind that finds the gaps in clothing and sits there. The radiator in the library ran in cycles, 40 minutes of heat, then a long clicking silence, then heat again. In the silence, the cold came back fast. I had started wearing 2 layers under my coat and keeping it on at the desk, which made turning the scrolls awkward but was better than the alternative. The cough was worse. I knew this without having to think about it, the way you know the difference between a car engine running fine and a car engine running on something it will eventually run out of. I kept a cloth in my right coat pocket. I used it. I kept working. My private notebook had grown thick with notes by then, not the catalog entries, those went into the official record, but the other observations. The ones that were for me. What a particular section contained, what it implied, what sat wrong about it. The gaps. There were gaps in the 20th century records that were not accidental. I had cataloged enough archives to know the difference between a gap made by time, water damage, lost material, simple neglect, and a gap made by a decision. These were decisions. Specific decades were present, and then not present, entries stopping mid-sequence and resuming 3 years later without explanation, the way a conversation resumes after someone has quietly removed a page. I wrote all of it down, not because it was my business, because I am thorough, and because thorough is the only thing I have ever been completely sure of. He came through twice that night. The first time, I heard him on the far side of the shelves, not footsteps exactly, more the pressure of a presence moving through a space that knew him. I did not look up. I was mid-entry, and did not lose my place. The second time he stopped. I felt it before I registered it consciously, The particular quality of stillness that is not empty but occupied, a stillness with weight to it. He was standing somewhere behind my left shoulder, close enough that the air near my neck felt fractionally different. I kept my pen moving. The entry I was writing was a 1987 record, a lineage notation, clean and uncomplicated, and I wrote it with the same care I had given every other entry that night. He did not speak. I did not look up. After a moment, the weight lifted. He moved on. I heard nothing, but the air changed back, and I knew. I turned the next scroll. My pen was still in my hand. My handwriting on the entry I had just completed was perfectly even. I noted, privately, that I had been holding my breath. It was close to 3 a.m. when I found it. I had been working through a box of loose documents, overflow from the shelf system, items that had not yet been formally filed, which was common in archives of this age. Things got separated over time. Most of what I was finding was straightforward. Correspondence, secondary records, material that belonged in the later sections and had simply drifted. This one was different. It was a full scroll, intact, labeled in the same hand as the official entries, precise, deliberate, and filed in a sleeve that placed it in 1931. The document itself was not from 1931. I could tell from the vellum alone, the way it had aged, the particular stiffness of it. Older, much older. And the contents, a lineage entry for a branch of the bloodline that, in the official archive, did not exist. Not a gap. A branch that had been removed. Not lost. Placed here in the wrong century, in a sleeve that a less careful cataloger would have simply filed and moved past. I sat with my hand resting on it. The radiator had gone into one of its silent phases. The library was very cold and very quiet, and the only light was the lamp at my desk, which made a small yellow circle that ended at the edge of the table. This was not my business. I knew this. I knew it the same way I knew the cough was worse, and the handwriting in my notebook was starting to drift smaller on the right side. Knowledge that arrives in the body before the mind gets around to naming it. I picked up my pen. I logged the document correctly, placed it in its proper sequence, noted the discrepancy in the official catalog, cross-referenced the branch entry with the section it belonged in. This is what correct looks like. This is what I do. Then I opened my private notebook. I wrote down what I had found. The date on the sleeve. The actual approximate age of the document. The branch name. What the entry contained. I wrote it in the same even hand I use for everything, the hand that has not changed in 20 years, the hand I intend to keep steady for as long as I have it. I did not know who had hidden it, or why, or whether he knew. I did not need to know those things to do my job correctly. I closed the notebook and went back to work. Outside, somewhere above the building, Lansing was doing what it does at 3 a.m. in November, which is nothing, no sound, the streets empty and the oaks on Michigan Avenue bare, and the graves completely visible in whatever light was left.
I did not think about that.
I thought about the next scroll in the box, whether it was misfiled too, what the rest of a century would show me when I reached it. I was still working when the radiator started up again. The heat came back slowly. I did not take off my coat. The week I slowed down, I knew it before he did. Not by much. 2, maybe 3 days. The body announces these things quietly before anyone else picks up the signal, a heaviness at the end of the night that had not been there before, a place in my chest where the breath went shallow without warning, the way my right hand needed more time between entries than it used to. I noted it the same way I noted everything. Filed it. Kept working. He noticed on a Thursday. I heard him come in, the particular pressure of his presence, which I had learned by then the way you learn the sound of a building settling, not consciously, just through repetition, and I did not look up because I was mid-entry, and the date notation required precision. He stopped at the end of my table. I finished the line. I looked up. He was not looking at the scroll. He was looking at me. You have completed 40% less this week than the previous 2. He said it the way a man states the temperature outside. Factual, impersonal, faintly inconvenienced. The section I'm in is more complex, I said. Which was true. Also not the whole truth. The complexity has not changed. He moved to the shelf beside the table, straightened a document that did not need straightening, a gesture so small I almost missed it. I have watched humans extend assignments before. The methodology is familiar. A slowing of pace. An escalation of visible effort. The implication that the work requires more than was originally understood. He let that sit for a moment. I let it sit with him. "You are performing," he said. "I do not reward performance." The part of me that might have answered that, the younger part, the part that had once sat across from a department head and made a precise, controlled case for itself and been dismissed anyway, that part had gone somewhere quieter over the years.
Not gone.
Just quieter. The way a sound becomes background, still present, simply no longer the loudest thing in the room. I was not hurt. That is the truth I would not have admitted to anyone who asked. I was not hurt. I was tired. There is a difference, and it matters, and most people I have known have never understood it. Hurt means you expected something different. I had stopped expecting. "Would you like me to work through the weekend?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment, reading maybe for the protest I had not made, for the wound that was supposed to be there. "Yes," he said. He left. I turned to the next scroll. Here is the thing about being told you are performing. When you are not, it costs you nothing to hear it. The accusation slides off clean, like water off stone that has been cold for a long time. What I noticed, sitting there after he had gone, was not anger and not the particular ache of being misread. What I noticed was the specific quality of the library's silence after he left, the way it settled back around me like something that recognized me. The cedar smell, the cold, the lamp. I had been in rooms all my life where I was either needed or inconvenient, and I had learned to be useful in both. This room needed what I was doing. The work did not care what he thought of me. The scrolls did not care. The archive would be correct when I was finished, regardless of his diagnosis, and that correctness would remain after everything else about this winter was gone. I wrote 3 more entries. My handwriting was even. I did not take the shortcut home until after midnight. The Michigan Avenue Cemetery runs along the east side of the road in a way that makes it easy to forget it is there in summer, when the oaks are full and the street feels ordinary. In November, the oaks were stripped entirely, and the graves were plainly visible from the path. No screening, no softening, just stone and dark grass, and the particular quiet of a place that has been receiving the dead for over a century and has run out of things to say about it. I used the path through because the cold air, the dry open cold away from the building's stone walls, did something useful to my chest. Opened it, gave the breath more room. I had discovered this in October and kept doing it, which meant I walked past the graves 3 or 4 nights a week now, close enough to read the inscriptions on the older stones when the moon was right. That night I stopped. Not from the cough, it had quieted in the cold, the way it sometimes did. I stopped at a stone bench near the largest of the oaks, the one whose roots had lifted a section of the path decades ago and never been repaired. I sat down. Not from weakness.
I want to be clear about that.
I sat down deliberately, the way you sit down when you want to look at something properly instead of walking past it.
The graves.
The bare trees. The sky above Lansing, which at midnight in November is the color of old pewter, low cloud catching the city's light from underneath and holding it. I will be here one day. The thought arrived without drama, without the particular weight I might have expected from it. A fact, arriving the way facts do when you have had enough time to get used to them. Somewhere in Michigan, in a city that does not know my name,
A stone with dates on it.
the gap between the dates a private matter, legible only to people who do the arithmetic. And the scrolls will still be there. They will be right. Complete. Every entry in its correct sequence, every hidden thing logged and returned to where it belongs. The archive will exist long after this bench, and these oaks, and the particular quality of this cold. It will exist long after he has forgotten that he accused me of performing. That was not a small thing to know. I sat with it for a moment, just a moment, the cold working at the back of my neck, the city quiet in every direction. A Lansing that was not watching anyone. A night that required nothing. Then I stood up. I straightened my coat. I walked home. Lansing is not a city most people would choose for this kind of thing. For old power, or the kind of history that holds its shape without announcing itself. The buildings on Washington Square have been keeping quiet longer than anyone living remembers. There are others who work in those buildings. Women mostly. Quietly. For longer than seems reasonable. We do not explain ourselves to each other. We just recognize each other, across the street, in the early dark before the city wakes. We nod. We go back to work. I went home. I slept. I came back the next night. I was still working. December arrived in my ribcage before it arrived anywhere else. That is the only way I know to describe it. Not as weather, not as a date on a calendar, but as a physical fact, a pressure behind the sternum that I remembered from childhood, standing in the backyard watching the sky go the wrong color before a storm. My body has always known things ahead of schedule. It knew this too. I was still working. Still. The word had become something I said to myself on the stairs each night, going down. A small, private insistence. The handwriting in my private notebook had begun to drift on the right side of each line, where my grip was weakest in the cold, the letters compressing into themselves the way writing does when the hand is spending more effort than it is letting on. I had started writing more slowly. The entries were still exact. The pace was the only thing that had changed, and I was the only one who could see it clearly enough to measure. The archive was close to complete. Not finished. There was still the misfiled century to fully reconcile, still cross-references to verify, but close. The shape of the whole thing was visible to me now the way a room is visible in the dark once your eyes have adjusted. Not bright but present, fully legible. I had started sleeping with my notebook on the nightstand. Not for any practical reason. I just wanted it near. He came to my desk on a Tuesday, earlier in the evening than usual, before I had fully settled into the night's work. He stood at the end of the table and did not open with an accusation, which was the first indication that something was different. The disordered section, he said. Your assessment. I looked up. He was not looking at the shelves. He was looking at the table surface, at the catalog, at my notes, at the careful architecture of the work spread out in front of me. Not reading it. Taking stock of it. Deliberate concealment, I said. Not consistent concealment. The methods changed across decades, which suggests more than one hand. The earliest hidden material predates the disorganization by about 40 years, which means someone was working with an existing system and choosing what to remove from it rather than disrupting the system itself. Whoever started it knew the archive well. He was quiet for a moment. The branch entry, he said. Filed in the wrong century. I've corrected the placement. It's cross-referenced in the main catalog now. I paused. It's also in my notes if you want the full sequence of what I found and where. He did not say yes. He did not say anything. He moved to the near shelf and stood with his back half-turned to me, one hand resting against the wood, not touching the documents. Thinking, or whatever the equivalent of thinking is for someone who has had long enough to make it look like stillness. That was the moment I understood something about him that his contempt had been obscuring. He was not incurious. He was defended. There is a difference, a significant one, and I had spent enough time in rooms with powerful men to know how to read it. The contempt was a method. Underneath it, he was paying very close attention. He did not thank me. He left. I sat for a moment with my pen uncapped, not writing. The lamp made its small circle. The cedar smell was stronger that night, something in the cold drawing it out of the old wood. Outside, Lansing was doing whatever Lansing does on a Tuesday in December, which is mostly just indoor. I thought. He heard every word. He will not say so. And I will come back tomorrow, and we will pretend this conversation happened the way the others did. Then I opened the catalog and went back to work, which is what I always do. The cough came late, past midnight. In the middle of a sequence, I did not want to interrupt. I had felt it building for the better part of an hour, not the sharp, sudden kind, but the slow kind, the kind that gathers in the lower chest like pressure behind a door. I kept working. I finished the entry. I set the pen down and covered my mouth with the cloth from my coat pocket, and the cough that came out was not the kind that passes in a moment.
It took time.
It had weight. When it was done, the cloth was damp and my eyes were watering from the effort, and the library was very, very quiet. He was standing in the doorway. I did not know how long he had been there. I folded the cloth, put it back in my pocket. My hands were doing the thing they do when I need them to be reliable, moving with extra deliberateness, each motion completed before the next one starts. "This performance," he said, "is getting elaborate." His voice had an edge to it that was almost boredom. Almost. Not quite. I looked at him. Not with anger. I want to be precise about this, because anger would have required me to believe he owed me something different. Not with pleading, which would have required a version of myself I had retired years ago. With something that had no performance in it at all. The look of a woman who is holding something privately and does not need it witnessed. Who has, in fact, stopped needing things witnessed. He does not understand what he is seeing. That is not my problem to solve. I turned back to the scroll,
Picked up my pen.
found my place in the entry, the exact word where I had stopped, and continued from it. He stood in the doorway for another moment. I did not look up again. The silence between us was not comfortable and not uncomfortable. It was simply occupied, each of us on our own side of it, and the work was on my side, and the work was enough. He left. I finished the entry. The handwriting on the last 2 lines was slightly smaller than the rest, not much, not enough that anyone unfamiliar with my hand would notice. I noticed. I closed the catalog, opened my private notebook, and added 3 lines of observation about what we had discussed, his response, the sequence of the hidden documents as I now understood it. Then I wrote at the bottom of that page in the same even hand, "He heard me. He will not say so. The work is still right." Outside, December continued its patient business. The graves along Michigan Avenue were visible in the pewter dark, stone and bare ground, and the old oaks holding nothing. I did not walk home through the cemetery that night. I stayed at my desk a little longer. The cold had weight. The lamp had its circle. I was still there inside it, and for the moment, just the moment, that was exactly enough. There are nights the body announces itself clearly, and nights it goes quiet in a way that means the same thing. This was a quiet night. I knew it on the stairs going down. Not as dread, not as anything that required a name, just a knowing that arrived the way certain kinds of weather arrive. Complete, already decided, not asking for my opinion on the matter. I had been in this body long enough to understand when it was telling me something it had already settled on. The mind can argue. The mind is very good at arguing. The body, at a certain point, simply stops listening to the argument and gets on with it. I set my bag down at the desk. I took out my pen. I opened the catalog to where I had left it the night before. I worked carefully. More carefully than usual, if that was possible, and I am aware that from the outside, careful and more careful look identical when the result is the same. Every entry exact. Every cross-reference verified before I moved to the next. The handwriting was slower on the right side, but it was correct, which is the only thing that has ever mattered to me about my handwriting. There was one section left. The last of the misfiled century for scrolls I had been saving, not consciously, not as a strategy, but in the way you save the last of something good, without admitting to yourself that you are doing it. I had been saving them. I opened the first one. He was present more than usual that night. Not at my desk. He moved through the far shelves in his particular way, appearing and then not appearing, the sound of him replaced periodically by the sound of the radiator, which was running steadily for once, throwing heat without interruption. I was aware of him the way I was aware of the radiator. Background, present, a fact of the room rather than a focus of it. He passed the end of my shelf row twice.
Did not stop. Did not speak.
I did not look up. I was working. The second scroll. The third. The fourth scroll was the one that contained the lineage I had been building toward. The branch entry I had corrected in November, its full context, the records that explained what had been hidden, and more precisely, why someone had believed it worth hiding. I read it slowly. Not from difficulty. From the sense that some things deserve to be read at the speed they were written, which is always slower than we expect. I catalogued it. Every field. Every cross-reference. The entry was long, and I did not rush it, and when I reached the final line and wrote the closing notation, my pen lifted from the page, and I held it there for a moment, above the paper, not writing anything. The archive was complete. I set the pen down. I opened my private notebook to the last page that had writing on it, turned past it to a clean page, and I wrote, not quickly, not slowly, just at the pace of a woman writing something she knows is the last thing she will write in this particular book. The Bloodline Archive is correct. All sections accounted for. MB. I closed the notebook. This is the moment I want to stay in for a little while. Not because anything happened. Nothing happened. He was in the next room. The radiator ran. The lamp made its circle on the table. I was at my desk with my hands resting flat on either side of the closed notebook, and the library was the library, and December was December, pressing in from every direction. I did not leave when my shift ended. I told myself this was because I wanted to review the final entries before closing out. That is not true, or not the whole truth. I stayed because the library smelled like old cedar, and underneath that, something that has no name in any language I know, the smell of stone that has been cold for centuries, of a building that has been holding the same air for longer than anyone has been alive to breathe it. Permanence has a smell. I had not known that before October. I knew it now. I was not afraid. I want to be precise about that because it is not a small thing to say, and I will not say it carelessly. I had spent 3 months in this library being slowly, measurably, unarguably consumed by the thing living in my chest, and on this particular night, in this particular cold, I was not afraid of it. Not because I had made peace with it. Peace implies negotiation, and I am not a woman who negotiates with facts. Because the work was right. Because the archive was complete. Because I had done, with my remaining capacity, exactly the thing I had come here to do, and the doing of it was not diminished by what it cost me. The cough had quieted. It did that sometimes at the end of a very cold night, the chest going still rather than fighting. I knew by then not to take it as news. It was not news. It was just quiet, and the quiet was its own thing. Not a promise, not a reprieve, just the particular quality of a room where a woman has stopped coughing. I was very still. Outside, Lansing held itself in December's grip the way it always does, without complaint, without ceremony, the oaks along Michigan Avenue stripped bare and the graves visible from the road, and the city asking nothing of anyone who did not want to give it. I had walked past those graves enough times to know some of the names on the older stones. I had never told anyone that. There was no one to tell. He was in the next room. I could hear, distantly, the sound of him, movement, presence, the minor sounds of an immortal man occupying space without needing to justify it. He did not know I had not moved in over an hour. He would not know until morning, when the quality of the silence changed in a way that a man of his age would eventually understand. I thought, the scrolls are right. Every one. I thought, this room has been here longer than I have been alive, and it will be here long after, and for a few months of its very long life it held someone who took care of it properly. That is not nothing. My hands were still flat on the notebook. The lamp was still burning. The cedar smell was in everything. My coat, my hair, the pages of the catalog spread open beside me. I stayed a little longer. I was still there. I know what he does now. Not because I am watching, I do not think it works that way, and I have never been a woman who comforts herself with things she cannot verify. I know because I knew him. 3 months in that library was enough to read the shape of a man, even one who spent the entire time looking past me. Especially one like that. He found the notebook. I am certain of this. I left it where he would have to move it to use the desk, which meant he would have to decide, deliberately, whether to open it or discard it. He is not a man who discards things carelessly. He would have waited 2 days, maybe 3. Then he would have read it the way he listened to me describe the archive that Tuesday in December, completely without acknowledgement, taking in every word and giving nothing back. The last line would have stopped him. I know this because I wrote it to be complete, not to wound, and sometimes the most complete thing is the one that lands hardest precisely because it asked for nothing. I spent a long time in those final weeks thinking about what I was leaving behind. Not in the way people expect, not inventory, not regret. More like a quiet accounting. The archive was right. Every section, every hidden thing returned to its correct place, every gap documented, every branch of that long, complicated bloodline made legible to whoever came after me. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything I had come to do. I did not leave a note for him. The notebook was not a note for him. It was a record, which is a different thing entirely. A note would have implied I needed him to understand me. I had spent enough of my life needing to be understood by people who had already decided what I was. The work understood me. That was sufficient. I think about the library sometimes. The cedar smell, the cold, the particular quality of the silence down there, which was never empty but occupied, full of the weight of all those centuries of careful record. I think about the lamp on the desk and the way the light stopped at the edge of the table and left everything beyond it to the dark. I think about the radiator, clicking and failing and recovering, the way reliable things do. I think about the oaks along Michigan Avenue, bare all winter, the graves completely visible from the road from October until May. I walked past them enough times to know some of the names on the older stones. I never told anyone that. There was a bench near the largest oak where I sat once in November and looked at the sky over Lansing and thought, I will be here one day, in a place like this. I am. He comes every year on the night I did not return. I know this the way I know the archive is still correct, not from evidence I can hold, but from the kind of certainty that accumulates when you have read a person carefully enough for long enough to understand what they will do with their regret. He wears the white coat. He carries one rose. He holds it too tightly. I know this without needing to see it because that is what a man does when he is carrying something he does not know how to put down. He kneels, a king, on both knees. In a Lansing cemetery in December, in the cold that comes up through the ground and stays there, for a woman he called a performance. I do not say this with satisfaction.
I want to be honest about that.
There is no version of being right about your own death that feels like winning. What I feel, if feel is still the word available to me, is something quieter. The recognition that he is learning at the cost of eternity what I understood by the time I was sitting at that desk in October, that the work is the point, that showing up is the point, that some people keep being careful and precise and thorough not because anyone is watching but because that is simply who they are and no amount of contempt from any direction changes it. He is still there, some years, when the sky begins to lighten. He straightens his coat before he stands. I noticed this about him in October, the way he always straightened his coat before moving from one place to another, a small private standard he held himself to when no audience required it. It is the thing about him that I found quietly worth knowing. A man who maintains his own standards in an empty room is a man who actually has them. He just could not extend that attention outward. Not in time. The grave is well tended. He sees to that. I did not ask him to and would not have, but it does not surprise me. He is, underneath the armor of a certainty, a man who understands the obligation of permanence. He will tend it for as long as there is a him to do the tending, which is, by the nature of what he is, a very long time. The archive is still correct. I am still here. He is the one who is to live in the silence, and I think, on the long December nights when he is kneeling in the cold with a darkening rose and no words he trusts himself to say, some part of him understands that the silence is not a punishment. It is just what remains when someone who is still working is no longer there to make a sound. If this story reached something in you that you did not expect, if you have ever kept going, kept being careful, kept doing the work even for someone who never looked up to see you doing it, you are not alone in that. There are women who understand exactly what this story cost. They are here. Subscribe and stay with us. These stories are easy to lose if you let them go.